All right, welcome back to the program. You're watching Daily Politics on Trust TV. Now let's switch gears and talk about electoral reform, because public trust in Nigerian elections appear to continue to drop, driven by allegations of manipulation, violence, inducement, and a whole lot of structural gaps. Now, a civil society group, the Movement for Credible Elections, has now petitioned the National Assembly, calling for quick action to strengthen the Electoral Act and related laws. We'll be speaking with the group's Deputy National Chairman, South, Ambassador Nkoyo Toyo, who is joining us virtually to add value to the conversation. She's also chairperson of the Labour and Civil Society Front, a former member of the House of Representatives, and a former Nigerian ambassador to Ethiopia. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining the conversation. It's good to see you this evening.
Thank you very much for having me. Good evening.
Right, let's start the conversation this way. Why is this conversation, in your view, important, and why should Nigerians care?
Well, as again, just to say how incredibly important this is, you are probably aware that INEC has announced that by middle of next year, primaries will be holding in the different political parties, and the candidates for the 2027 elections would have emerged by June. This is a fast forward in terms of giving us some deadlines, and which is useful, suggesting to us that the season for elections are here. And yet, between 2023, when we had a very, very contentious election, and now we haven't seen any strong steps taken to deal with some of the challenges that we had in the last election. So I guess that what we are trying to say by bringing together many, many voices across civil society into what we call a movement is to raise the bar and say that too late, too little is happening. And there are moves to have constitutional reforms. As you very well know, the National Assembly was expected to vote on the constitutional reform bills this last week, or this week that we are in, but unfortunately that has been postponed. In the light of what we are beginning to see, which is some sort of slowness in terms of getting to where we want things to go, we decided that as many platforms and as many groups as possible should come together and make it clear to the National Assembly that if we want indeed to see the Nigeria of the future that we expect, in the light of the kinds of things we've seen, the loss of legitimacy, the loss of voice, the loss of credibility, and we must give it to ourselves that it's a situation that is also interwoven with many other national problems that we have: insecurity, the lack of trust in our institutions, and so on and so forth. We've just spoken about corruption right now. This is an area that is pervaded by corruption as well, and nobody tends to believe the outcome of the process at the end of the day. So there is need, at least, for something to be done to show that at the end of 2027, government tried to improve on its records of 2023, particularly in regards to the use of electronic transmission mechanisms.
Right. And talk to me about this petition and why you think the National Assembly needs to speed up the amendment to the Electoral Act. I mean, some would say we still have a little over a year plus before the next general election. Why is time very important in this conversation?
Well, you know, the INEC runs on a timetable, and already we are beginning to see that a lot of these reforms, if they do not happen within a certain time frame, it will be almost impracticable for INEC to implement. We are concerned that, and there is a feeling in some quarters that maybe the time it takes to work on this is largely also an attempt at not seeing it happen. Hopefully that is not the case. Hopefully that's not the case. And we believe that the urgency of the now is that if we do want to see any of these reforms impact on the 2027 elections, we need to get it out of the way as soon as possible. INEC is already giving us timeframes, and we need to work within those timeframes and make sure that what we have on ground begins to work.
And Ambassador, talk to me about what realistically Nigerians can expect. You talk about electronic transmission of votes. There are a whole lot of ideas that we heard from last year, the 114 plus, or their recommendations that the former INEC chairman talked about, national chairman talked about. We now have a new helmsman in charge who is promising Nigerians the most credible elections they've seen yet. Talked about blocking all the loopholes and whatnot. Talk to me about these two things, the ideas that Nigerians have about what would make for a great electoral process, and some of the promises that we're hearing from Professor Joash Amopiton. Do these, assurances pacify some of the concerns that you have?
Well, we can't judge from just listening to him in the last 1 month where he stands and what credibility he brings to the job. We must say that one of the requirements we have on our list is that we should have more independent and more transparent and accountable means of nominating the INEC chairman. And unfortunately, because this is also happening very late in the day, we did not have the benefit of being able to insist that that process should have been credible. But let's go with what he has said. And the question that raises for me is, how is he going to do anything different when he's operating within the same framework as what we saw in 2023? And if we want to help him to achieve what he has promised Nigerians, first thing we must do is to show him through the changes in the Electoral Act that we really mean business. I think he emphasizes the fact that he wants to see elections settled at the level of electoral polling units, so that we do not have to take our litigation from polling units to the courts and up to the Supreme Court. That would be a real game changer if we can have transmission done directly, real time, from the BVAS into the IREF, and that becomes the basis on which election is accounted for. One of the things we've asked for example, is that, and it's still a matter of great concern, that even the 2023 election, up till now, we don't know the exact figure that was used to declare Mr. President the winner of the elections. So this time around, we're asking that we must be able to reconcile all the numbers and see that the numbers do add up properly before we even make a declaration on any election, as even if it's a House of Assembly election, on any election for that matter. So my point basically is that the reforms is central to the confidence that the process will live with Nigerians. 2-3 major changes will be the mandatory transmission of results right from the polling unit, so that those intermediaries that work at collation centers to undermine and change the results and the outcomes of elections would be prevented from doing so. So we deal less with intermediaries and interlopers and go directly to results. IREF itself must begin to account for something so that we can electronically, independent of interferences, get our result at the end of the process itself. The other thing we talked about is that it's not just a question of here is the result. We also said, look, people need to believe in it. People need to believe in it. And what does it take to make people believe? Because in the end, the legitimacy of government comes from the legitimacy of the electoral process itself. So it's all very critical. And I fear that, as we have seen in many parts of West Africa increasingly, that if people do not see the process as being accountable and being open and transparent, then a likelihood of resorting to self-help, doing the things that will make those results look as closely as possible to what they think it should be, may step in and become the problem of the elections of 2027. I think it's better that we deal with it now before we get into that season and it's too late in the day to do anything about it.
What is an acceptable timeline to you for this to be wrapped up and for INEC to put it to good use? Because we do have the Osun election coming up next year. Is that something that you would want to see become sort of like the testing ground for some of these amendments? Do you think some of these amendments would be ready by then?
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest with you, let's take the case of the transmission of the electoral and the use of IREV, the beavers, the transmission from the polling units. We do have all of that in place already. It's nothing we need to rethink. What happened, whether it's called glitches or no glitches or whatever it was, the more important question was, at the end of the day, somebody said you cannot use the result as transmitted into IREV. That's the problem. The problem is that mandatory and compulsory use of technology to determine this. I mean, let us at least get to that point. And then somebody says, oh, what you have as the result doesn't represent the outcome. That would be a major, major transition. I mean, a major, major change in the electoral process. And I think for many Nigerians are at the level of the polling unit, use the IRF to defend it. I think we basically have made a very significant progress in settling. And this does not need too much time. It's already in place. It's just a question of policy and implementation. The other thing is we must also learn clearly and be told in very certain terms that our technologies are not going to be tampered with. Many people still 23 we're not human made or human created. We need some assurances from INEC itself that these things are going to run. And there are many ways technology can self-check, self-audit. So we must, Nigeria already has the infrastructure in place, and the architecture of our electoral processes are already very much developed to the level that for the Osun elections, we can actually go a step further and do something about this.
And do you consider the electoral reform a panacea to voter apathy? Because we've seen voter turnout go down by significant percentages, election cycle after election cycle. Do you think that Nigerians would perhaps have a rethink about participating in, especially the 2027 elections, if some of these recommendations, some of these amendments are solidified in ink?
Absolutely. I would say absolutely. One of the reasons why there's so much apathy is that people just don't think their votes will count. People think their votes will not count. You know? So what's the value? And they walk away and they're not interested. Look at what happened in the Anambra elections, for example. The turnout was extremely low. So what I expect is that with the reform will also come more confidence in the electoral process. And with the confidence in the electoral process, we will be able to overcome some of.
Well, that's unfortunate. We've lost our connection to Honorable Ambassador Nkoyo Toyo there, who is speaking to us about the push by the movement and coalition of civil society organizations who have petitioned the National Assembly for speedy action on some of the amendments to the Electoral Act as part of processes that will usher in the 2027 elections. Unfortunately, the connection to Ambassador Toyo has been lost, and we're going to have to wrap things up for tonight's edition of the program. Thank you most kindly for joining us on the program. Daily Politics returns tomorrow live at 8 p.m. exclusive as always on Trust TV. I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. From myself and the rest of the team, thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon.